A mountain man seeking shelter from a deadly blizzard stumbled into an abandoned mine shack, never expecting that beyond a sealed tunnel lay $295 million and a secret that would change everything. Before we explore this incredible journey, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind came down from the peaks like a living thing, hungry and cold, tearing through the pines with a sound that made even the old trees bend and shudder. Jake Harper pulled his collar tighter around his neck, squinting against the snow that had turned from gentle flakes to horizontal knives in the span of 20 minutes. He'd been guiding expeditions through these Colorado mountains for nearly 15 years, and he knew when nature was giving a warning. This wasn't a warning anymore, this was a command. Get inside, now. He was 3 miles from his cabin, maybe 4 if the trail had drifted as badly as he suspected. His pack felt heavier with each step, loaded with supplies from town, canned goods, propane, batteries, the kinds of things you stockpile when you live alone at 8,000 feet, and winter doesn't ask permission to stay for 6 months. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in an hour. His beard was already crusted with ice, and his fingers, even in thick gloves, had started that dangerous transition from cold to numb. Jake was 47 years old, lean and weathered like the landscape he'd chosen to call home. His face carried the kind of lines that came from squinting into mountain sun and making peace with solitude. 15 years ago, he'd been someone else entirely. James Harper, senior mechanical engineer at a Denver aerospace firm, married, ambitious, climbing a ladder he'd been told mattered. Then his wife left, his daughter Emma chose college across the country, and the ladder started to look more like a treadmill. So he'd walked away from all of it. Sold the house, bought 40 acres of nothing, and built a life with his hands instead of his resume. People thought he was running. Maybe he had been at first. But somewhere in the silence between the peaks, he'd found something he hadn't known he'd lost. Himself. The trail disappeared completely under a fresh drift. Jake stopped, breathing hard, his lungs burning from the thin air and the cold. Visibility was down to maybe 30 feet. He pulled out his compass, more out of habit than need. He knew these mountains the way some men knew city streets, but knowing and surviving were 2 different things, and the storm was erasing the difference fast. He needed shelter. Not in an hour. Now. That's when he saw it, a dark shape through the swirling white, angular and man-made, tucked against the base of a rocky outcrop about 200 yards off the main trail. Jake's heart kicked with relief. He knew this area, had passed through it 100 times, but he'd never noticed a structure here before. Then again, the forest was full of forgotten things, old mining claims, ranger stations, cabins built and abandoned by people who'd underestimated the mountains and overestimated themselves. He pushed through the drifts, his legs burning, his face numb. The structure took shape as he got closer. A small shack, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, built from weathered timber and flat stones. The roof was corrugated metal, rusted but intact. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, and the windows were boarded up from the inside. Across the front, faded and barely legible, someone had painted words in white. Rocky Mountain Mining Company Ested. 1923. Jake didn't hesitate. He climbed the 2 snow-covered steps and pushed on the door. It resisted, swollen from moisture and time, but gave way with a hard shove and a groan of old wood. He stumbled inside and immediately pushed the door shut behind him, blocking out the wind's scream. The silence hit him first. After hours in the storm, the absence of wind felt almost unnatural, like stepping into a held breath. He stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. Thin lines of grey light seeped through gaps in the boarded windows, just enough to see shapes and shadows. The interior was a single room, larger than it had looked from outside. The walls were bare timber, darkened with age and smoke stains from what had probably been a wood stove. The floor was packed dirt, hard as concrete and surprisingly level. And everywhere, scattered like artifacts in a museum no one visited, were the remnants of the mining operation. Pickaxes with handles worn smooth, a rusted ore cart tipped on its side, coils of rope stiff with age, lanterns with cracked glass, and tools Jake couldn't even name. But what struck him most was the condition of it all. This place should have been a ruin, collapsed and reclaimed by the forest decades ago. Instead, it felt almost maintained. The roof didn't leak. The walls stood straight. Even the boards over the windows were fitted precisely, not haphazardly nailed like a rushed job. Someone had cared for this place, maybe recently. Jake dropped his pack and flexed his fingers, trying to work feeling back into them. His hands were red and stiff, but nothing felt frozen. He'd gotten here in time. Outside, the storm howled louder, and he knew with absolute certainty that he wasn't leaving until it passed. Could be hours, could be days. He pulled out his flashlight and swept the beam around the room, taking proper inventory now. In the far corner, he spotted something useful, a small pile of split firewood, dry and neatly stacked. Beside it, a fire pit lined with stones, blackened from use. Above the pit, a section of the metal roof had been fitted with a vent pipe. Whoever had set this up knew what they were doing. Jake gathered some of the wood and kindling, grateful beyond words. Within 10 minutes, he had a small fire going, the flames licking upward and filling the shack with flickering orange light. The warmth was immediate and almost painful as his frozen skin began to thaw. He pulled off his gloves and held his hands near the flames, breathing slowly, letting his body remember what heat felt like. As the room warmed and brightened, more details emerged. On one wall, someone had hung an old calendar, the kind with a scenic mountain photograph at the top and tear-away date pages below. Jake stepped closer and tilted his head to read it. January 1978. The pages had all been torn away except for one. March 15th. Someone had circled that date in red pen, though whatever significance it held had died with them. He turned and surveyed the rest of the space. Near the back wall, partially hidden behind the overturned ore cart, something caught his eye. A door. Or more accurately, the outline of where a door should be. It was fitted so precisely into the timber wall that he'd almost missed it. But now, with the firelight dancing across the surface, he could see the seams, a rectangular section about 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide, set into the wall like a panel. Jake approached it slowly, his engineer's mind already analyzing. This wasn't original to the structure. The wood was slightly different, newer, treated with some kind of sealant, and along the edges, barely visible, were heavy-duty hinges, industrial grade, the kind you'd use on a vault or a bank. He pressed his palm against the surface. Solid. He pushed harder. It didn't budge. He ran his fingers along the seam until he found what he was looking for, a lock mechanism. Not a simple padlock, but something built into the door itself. 3 separate keyhole points arranged in a triangle pattern. This wasn't keeping animals out. This was keeping people out. Jake stepped back, his pulse quickening. Every instinct he had, the ones honed by 15 years of living alone and learning when something was wrong, told him to leave this alone. But curiosity was a powerful thing, especially when you were trapped in a shack in a blizzard with nothing but time. He returned to his pack and pulled out his satellite phone. Up here, reception was spotty at best, but he had to try. He powered it on and waited. The screen glowed, searching for signal. 1 bar, then none, then one again. Not enough to make a call, but enough to send a text if he was lucky. He typed quickly. Emma, storm hit hard. Hold up in old mining shack off Eagle Ridge Trail. I'm safe. Love you, Dad. He hit send and watched the message sit in the outbox, trying to push through. After 30 seconds, it marked as delivered. Good enough. Emma, his daughter. 19 years old now, a sophomore at the University of Arizona studying environmental science. She'd inherited his brain and her mother's beauty, which seemed like both a blessing and a curse depending on the day. They talked every Sunday without fail, and she visited during breaks, though she always complained about the cold and the lack of cell service. She was the only person in the world who could pull him back to civilization when the mountains got too quiet. Jake set the phone aside and turned his attention back to the sealed door. He walked the perimeter of the room, looking for anything that might help him understand what he was dealing with. Near the woodpile, he found a metal toolbox, old but functional, Inside, wrenches, screwdrivers, a hammer, wire cutters, and at the bottom, wrapped in oiled cloth, a leather journal. His hands trembled slightly as he unwrapped it. The leather was cracked but intact, and the pages inside were filled with handwritten notes in tight, precise script. He carried it closer to the fire and sat down on an old crate to read. The first entry was dated March 3rd, 1978. Final inspection complete. The cache is secure. All documentation sealed per protocol. Command confirms. No record of this location exists outside of classified channels. In the event of national emergency, access codes will be transmitted via secure channels. Until then, this site remains dormant. God help us if we ever need to open it. It was signed, Robert Matthews, Security Officer, District 7. Jake flipped through more pages. Most were technical logs, temperature readings, structural assessments, security checks. Matthews had visited this site regularly, sometimes monthly, for nearly 2 years. Then the entries stopped abruptly in July of 1979. But there was one final entry, written in shakier handwriting, dated much later, November 5th, 2010. I'm 74 now, dying, cancer. I've kept this secret for 31 years. They told us to destroy it after the Cold War ended, to eliminate any trace. I couldn't. This money belonged to the people, not to politicians who wanted to bury their mistakes. I've maintained this site alone all these years. No one knows, no one cares. The world moved on. But I remember. If you're reading this, you found it. Do what's right. What I couldn't. Jake read the entry 3 times, his mind racing. Cash, money, Cold War, emergency protocols. He stood up and walked back to the sealed door, seeing it differently now. This wasn't just a locked door. This was a vault, and whatever Robert Matthews had spent 31 years protecting was on the other side. The storm outside intensified, rattling the metal roof and shaking the walls. Jake looked at the door, then at the journal in his hands, then back at the door. He should wait. He should leave this alone. He should hike out when the storm passed and call the authorities, let them handle it. But that's not what he did. Instead, he opened the toolbox and pulled out a heavy pry bar. He positioned himself in front of the door, found the edge of the frame, and began to work. The first lock took him 40 minutes. The mechanism was sophisticated but old, and with enough pressure in the right places, the internal pins gave way. The second lock was harder, requiring him to remove part of the door frame to access the mechanism from the side. By the time he broke through the third lock, 3 hours had passed, his shoulders ached, and his hands were blistered. But the door moved. It swung inward with a heavy, pneumatic hiss, like air pressure equalizing. Beyond it, darkness, complete and total, the kind that swallows light. Jake grabbed his flashlight and stepped forward. The beam cut through the black, revealing not a small storage space but a tunnel, a real tunnel, carved into the mountain itself, with timber supports every 10 feet and a floor that had been leveled and packed. The walls were dry, showing no signs of water damage or collapse, and running along the ceiling, encased in protective conduit, were electrical wires. Jake's breath caught. This wasn't just preserved, this was maintained. He stepped into the tunnel, his boots echoing on the hard-packed floor. The temperature dropped immediately, but it wasn't the wet cold of a natural cave. It was controlled, regulated. Every 20 feet, he passed ventilation grates set into the walls, and though he couldn't hear anything running, he suspected there was still some kind of air circulation system active. The tunnel ran straight for about 50 yards, then turned sharply to the right. Jake followed, his light bouncing off the walls, his heart hammering in his chest. Around the corner, the tunnel widened into a larger chamber, maybe 15 feet across. And there, set into the far wall like something out of a heist movie, was a vault door. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall and 5 feet wide, made of brushed steel that still gleamed despite decades underground. The door had a central wheel mechanism, the kind you'd see on old bank vaults, surrounded by what looked like a combination lock system. Jake approached slowly, almost reverently. He placed his hand on the cold metal and felt the weight of it, the engineering, the purpose. This wasn't some forgotten mining operation. This was government. This was military. This was something that wasn't supposed to exist. He examined the lock mechanism. Unlike the door to the tunnel, this one wasn't designed to keep people out through brute force. It was designed to be opened, but only by someone with the right combination. The wheel had numbers etched around its circumference, 0 through 99, and beside it was a series of smaller dials. Jake pulled out the journal again and flipped through the pages more carefully, looking for anything that might be a code, a sequence, a clue. Most of the technical entries were just that, technical. But then he found something. A page near the middle where Matthews had written what looked like random numbers, then crossed them out, then more numbers, then a note. Her birthday, I'll never forget. Below that, 3/15/52/67/11/88. Jake's hands shook as he set the journal down and turned back to the vault. He reached for the first dial and began to turn it, counting carefully. 3, click, 15, click, 52, click. He continued through the sequence, his breath held, his entire body tense. When he entered the final number, 88, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then, deep within the door, something mechanical engaged. A series of heavy metallic thuds echoed through the chamber as internal bolts retracted. The wheel turned freely in his hands. Jake grabbed it with both hands and pulled. The door was heavy, incredibly heavy, but it moved. Inch by inch, it swung outward on perfectly balanced hinges, revealing the space beyond. He raised his flashlight and saw something that made the room spin. Rows of metal containers. Military-grade storage cases, each about 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, stacked on industrial shelving that ran the length of the chamber. The cases were sealed, labeled with faded military stamps and serial numbers. And there were dozens of them, maybe more than 100. Jake stepped inside, his legs unsteady. The chamber was climate-controlled. He could feel it immediately. Dry air, regulated temperature, the kind of preservation system that cost serious money to install and maintain. He approached the nearest shelf and selected a container at random. The latch was stiff but functional. He opened it. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, were bundles. Tight, neat bundles of bearer bonds. He lifted one out carefully, his hands trembling. They were certificates, each one printed with elaborate engravings and official seals, and at the top of each certificate, printed in bold letters, United States Treasury, bearer bond, value $100,000. Jake's vision blurred. He set the bundle down and opened another container. More bonds, then another, and another. Every container he opened was the same. Bearer bonds, perfectly preserved, untraceable, and according to the dates printed on them, issued between 1976 and 1983. He did the math in his head, then did it again because it couldn't be right. Each container held approximately 50 bonds. Each bond was worth $100,000. That meant each container held roughly $5 million. And there were, by his count, at least 59 containers visible on the shelves. $295 million. Jake sat down hard on the cold floor, his back against the metal shelving, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. This wasn't a myth. This wasn't a conspiracy theory. This was real. This was here. And according to Robert Matthews' journal, the government had ordered this destroyed 30 years ago. But Matthews hadn't destroyed it. He'd hidden it, protected it, died keeping the secret. And now Jake Harper, a man who'd walked away from the world to live in the mountains, was sitting in an underground vault, staring at enough money to change 1,000 lives. The storm outside continued to rage, but Jake barely heard it anymore. All he could hear was the sound of his own breathing and the quiet voice in the back of his mind, asking the question he didn't want to answer. What the hell was he supposed to do now? Hours passed. Jake sat in the vault, surrounded by fortune and ghosts, the journal open in his lap. He read every entry again, trying to understand Matthews, trying to understand the decisions that led to this moment. Matthews had been a security officer, a man with orders. Destroy the evidence, eliminate the trail, make sure no one ever knew the government had created an emergency slush fund during the height of Cold War paranoia and then wanted to quietly erase it when the threat passed. But Matthews had seen something else. He'd seen money that belonged to the American people being buried to avoid political embarrassment. So he'd committed the ultimate betrayal. He'd followed his conscience instead of his orders. For 31 years, he'd maintained this site alone, visited it, checked the seals, made sure the climate control system stayed functional, all while living a normal life, dying slowly of cancer, carrying a secret that could have destroyed him. The last entry in the journal haunted Jake. Do what's right, what I couldn't. What did that mean? What was right? Turning this over to the same government that had tried to hide it? Keeping it secret like Matthews had? Taking it? Jake laughed once, a short, bitter sound that echoed in the vault. Taking it. As if he could walk out of here with 300 metal cases on his back. As if he could turn $295 million in bearer bonds into groceries and propane without every federal agency in the country hunting him down. No, this wasn't about taking. This was about something bigger, something that made his stomach twist with equal parts fear and purpose. This was about truth. He closed the journal and stood up, his legs stiff from sitting. He walked through the vault one more time, shining his light on each container, each label, each piece of evidence that this place existed. Then he pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. He photographed everything: the containers, the bonds, the military stamps, the serial numbers, the journal entries. His phone's memory filled quickly, but he kept going, deleting old photos of mountains and sunsets to make room for this. When he was done, he had 317 photographs, irrefutable evidence. He sealed the containers he'd opened, returned everything to exactly how he'd found it, and stepped back into the tunnel. The vault door swung closed with a solid thunk, the locks engaging automatically. He made his way back through the tunnel, through the sealed door, and into the main shack. The fire had burned down to embers. He fed it more wood and sat down, exhausted, his mind spinning. Outside, the storm had finally started to ease. The wind had dropped from a scream to a steady moan, and through the cracks in the boards, he could see the grey light of dawn beginning to seep through the clouds. He'd been here all night. Jake pulled out his satellite phone. 2 bars. Better than before. He navigated to Emma's contact and typed out a message, then deleted it, then typed another and deleted that too. What could he possibly say? Hi, honey. Found a secret government vault. What should I do? Instead, he typed, storm passing. Heading home soon. Call you when I get there. Love you. He sent it, then opened a new message to Marcus, his lawyer friend in Denver. Marcus Chen was one of the few people from Jake's old life he still talked to. They'd worked together at the aerospace firm, bonded over late nights and impossible deadlines. When Jake left, Marcus had been the only one who didn't try to talk him out of it. Instead, he'd said, "If you ever need anything, I'm here." Jake had never taken him up on it. Until now. He typed, Marcus, need to talk, urgent. Found something in the mountains. Can't explain over text. Trust me on this. Are you available this week? He hit send and watched the message deliver. Then he powered off the phone to save battery. The dawn light grew stronger. The storm was breaking. Within a few hours, he'd be able to hike out safely. But everything had changed. The man who'd stumbled into this shack seeking shelter from a blizzard was gone. In his place was someone who'd been handed a responsibility he never wanted and couldn't ignore. Jake stood and walked to the sealed door one more time. He reached out and touched the wood, feeling the grain beneath his palm. Behind this door was a secret that powerful people had tried to bury. Behind this door was enough money to change everything. Behind this door was a choice. And Jake Harper, the man who'd run from the world to find peace in the mountains, realized that sometimes peace isn't something you find. Sometimes it's something you fight for. He turned away from the door, gathered his pack, and kicked snow over the fire pit. As the last embers died, he took one final look around the shack. It looked exactly as it had when he'd arrived. Old, forgotten, unremarkable. Just another piece of mountain history slowly being reclaimed by time. But Jake knew better now. Sometimes the most important things are the ones hidden in plain sight. Sometimes the greatest discoveries happen when you're just trying to survive. And sometimes A simple act of seeking shelter can lead you to something that will change not just your life, but everything you thought you knew about right and wrong. He pushed open the door and stepped into the pale morning light. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in fresh snow that sparkled like diamonds under the emerging sun. The air was cold and clean, and for a moment everything felt peaceful. But Jake's heart hammered in his chest because he knew what came next. He knew that the moment he walked off this mountain and made a phone call, everything would change. There would be questions, investigations, threats, maybe even danger. The kind of people who bury $300 million don't take kindly to people who dig it up. He thought of Emma, safe in Arizona, studying her textbooks and dreaming of saving forests. He thought of Matthews, dying alone with his secret. He thought of all the people who'd been cheated, forgotten, erased by decisions made in rooms they'd never see. And he started walking. The trail down was treacherous, buried under 2 feet of new snow, but Jake moved with purpose now. Each step was a commitment, each breath was a promise. He'd found something that wasn't supposed to exist, and he'd made a choice about what to do with it. By the time he reached the main trail 3 hours later, his legs were burning and his face was numb from the cold, but his mind was clear. He pulled out his satellite phone and powered it on. Full signal. He pulled up Marcus's contact and hit call. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Jake? Man, I got your message. What's going on? You okay?" Jake looked back up the mountain, toward where the shack sat hidden among the trees, guarding its secret. Then he looked forward, down toward civilization, toward consequences, toward whatever came next. "Marcus," he said, his voice steady, "I need you to listen very carefully, and I need you to not ask questions until I'm done talking. Can you do that?" There was a pause. Then, Yeah, I can do that." Jake took a deep breath. The morning sun broke through the clouds, warming his face, and then he told Marcus everything. Marcus Chen's voice came through the satellite phone like a lifeline cutting through static and disbelief. "Jake, are you absolutely sure about what you're telling me? Because if this is real, if even half of what you're saying is true, you've just stepped into something that goes way beyond finding old mining equipment." Jake stood on the trail, snow up to his knees, the morning sun now fully visible over the eastern peaks. His breath came out in white clouds, and his fingers had started to go numb again despite his gloves. But he held the phone steady, his voice unwavering. "I'm sure, Marcus. I photographed everything, 317 images, the containers, the bonds, the journal entries, all of it. This isn't some treasure hunter fantasy. This is real government infrastructure, maintained and sealed. Someone spent serious money keeping this place functional for decades." He could hear Marcus breathing on the other end, processing. They'd known each other for almost 20 years. Marcus knew Jake wasn't the type to exaggerate or fabricate. If anything, Jake understated things, preferring facts over drama. "Okay," Marcus finally said. "Okay, listen to me very carefully. Do not tell anyone else about this. Not yet. Get off that mountain, get somewhere warm, and send me those photographs through an encrypted channel. I'll set up a secure file transfer. Do not use regular email. Do not post them anywhere. Do not show them to anyone. You understand?" "I understand." "Good. How soon can you get to civilization?" Jake looked down the trail. "I'm about 2 hours from my cabin. Another hour from there to get cell service at the main road. Maybe 4 hours total if I push it." "Push it. I'll have everything set up by then. Jake?" "Yeah?" "Whatever this is, whatever you've found, it's going to get complicated fast. Are you prepared for that?" Jake thought about the journal, about Robert Matthews dying alone with his secret, about the choice that had been placed in his hands. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." "That's what I figured. Be careful coming down. And Jake, watch your back. If what you found is what I think it is, there are people who won't be happy it's been discovered." The line went dead. Jake pocketed the phone and started hiking. His legs protested with every step, exhausted from the climb up, the sleepless night, and now the descent. But adrenaline pushed him forward. His mind raced through scenarios, possibilities, consequences. He'd crossed a line the moment he'd opened that vault door. There was no going back now. The trail wound through dense pine forest, the branches heavy with fresh snow that occasionally dumped onto his shoulders and down his neck. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a beautiful hike, the kind that reminded him why he'd chosen this life. But today, every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made him turn his head. He was being paranoid. No one knew what he'd found. No one except Marcus, and Marcus could be trusted. Still, the weight of the secret pressed on him like the weight of his pack, growing heavier with each mile. By the time he reached his cabin, the sun was high and bright, reflecting off the snow with an intensity that made his eyes water. The cabin sat in a small clearing, a simple A-frame structure he'd built himself over the course of 2 summers. Solar panels on the roof, a wood stove for heat, a well for water. Everything he needed, nothing he didn't. He stomped the snow off his boots and pushed through the door. Inside, the air was cold but not frozen. He'd left the wood stove damped down but not completely out, and a few coals still glowed faintly in the firebox. He fed in some kindling and small logs, coaxing the fire back to life. While the cabin warmed, he stripped off his wet outer layers and hung them near the stove to dry. Then he fired up his laptop, an older model that he kept charged through the solar battery bank. The screen flickered to life, and he checked for the encrypted file transfer link Marcus had promised. It was there. An email with a single line. Upload here. Delete original files after transfer. Burn this message. Jake smiled despite himself. Marcus always had a flair for the dramatic, but he followed the instructions precisely. He connected his phone to the laptop, transferred all 317 photographs to the encrypted upload portal, waited for confirmation that they'd been received, then deleted every trace from his phone and laptop. The fire crackled and popped, filling the cabin with warmth. Jake made himself coffee, strong and black, and sat at his small kitchen table. His hands shook slightly as he wrapped them around the mug. Not from cold, from the realization of what he'd set in motion. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Dad, just saw your message. Glad you're okay. That storm looked gnarly on the weather report. Call me when you can." Jake's chest tightened. Emma. His reason for everything. The thought of putting her in any kind of danger made his stomach turn. But keeping this secret, letting it stay buried, that felt wrong too. Matthews had trusted whoever found the vault to do the right thing, and the right thing, Jake was increasingly certain, was bringing this into the light. He typed back, "Hey kiddo, I'm good. Made it through fine. Holed up in an old mining shack. Actually pretty interesting. I'll call you tonight. Love you." He sent the message, then set the phone down. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until he understood what he was dealing with. His laptop chimed. An email from Marcus. "Got the files? Jesus Christ, Jake. This is bigger than I thought. Can you video chat? Need to show you something." Jake opened the secure video chat application Marcus had set up months ago, something about end-to-end encryption and not trusting regular platforms. Marcus's face appeared on screen, looking exactly as Jake remembered. Late 40s, sharp features, expensive glasses that he constantly pushed up his nose when he was thinking hard. "Show me the journal pages again," Marcus said without preamble. "The ones with Matthew's information." Jake pulled up the relevant photographs and shared his screen. Marcus leaned in close, his eyes scanning every line. "Robert Matthews," Marcus muttered. "Security Officer District 7. I've been digging for the last 3 hours. Jake, do you have any idea what District 7 was?" "Some kind of military designation." "Not military. Intelligence. During the Cold War, the government created these black budget operations, completely off-book. District 7 was tasked with creating emergency contingency funds in case of catastrophic national events. Nuclear war, Soviet invasion, complete governmental collapse. The idea was to have untraceable assets hidden across the country that could be used to rebuild or fund resistance operations. Jake set his coffee down. "Bearer bonds?" "Exactly. Bearer bonds are essentially cash. Whoever physically holds them owns them. No names, no registration, completely anonymous." perfect for emergency situations where traditional banking systems might be compromised or destroyed. So this was legitimate? The government actually created this? Marcus nodded, his expression grim. Created it, funded it, and then when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, they were supposed to destroy it all. Every cash, every bond, every trace of the program. Too much political risk if it ever came out that billions of taxpayer dollars had been hidden away in secret slush funds. But Matthews didn't destroy it. No. And according to these journal entries, he was the only one who knew the location of this particular cache. The program was so compartmentalized that each security officer only knew about their own site. When they were ordered to destroy everything, Matthews had a choice: follow orders and erase evidence of what he saw as theft from the American people, or hide it and hope someone would eventually do what he couldn't. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that had become his home. What couldn't he do? Make it public. Expose the corruption. He was a security officer, Jake. He'd signed secrecy agreements, taken oaths. If he'd gone public during his lifetime, he would have been prosecuted, probably imprisoned. His family would have been destroyed. So he kept the secret and maintained the site, hoping that one day, after he was gone, someone would find it and have the courage he couldn't muster. And now someone has. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Jake, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What do you want to do with this? Jake turned back to the screen. I want to do what Matthews asked. I want to do what's right. And what does right look like to you? Jake thought about it. He thought about the years he'd spent running from responsibility, from complication, from the world. He thought about Emma and the future she deserved. He thought about all the people who'd been told there wasn't enough money for schools, for infrastructure, for healthcare, while hundreds of millions of dollars sat hidden in mountain vaults. I want to give it back, he said finally. Not to the politicians who tried to hide it, to the people it was taken from. I want this money used the way it should have been used in the first place. Marcus nodded slowly. That's going to make a lot of powerful people very uncomfortable. Good. Jake, listen to me. If you go public with this, if you expose what you've found, your life is going to change completely. There will be investigations, hearings, media attention. And there will be people who see you as a threat, people with resources and connections who won't want this story told. I know. Do you? Because I'm not talking about stern letters and uncomfortable phone calls. I'm talking about the kind of pressure that breaks people. Character assassination, legal threats, maybe even physical danger. These aren't the kind of folks who play by normal rules. Jake walked back to the table and sat down, looking directly into the camera. Marcus, I spent 15 years in these mountains trying to find peace by running away from complicated decisions. I thought if I removed myself from society, from politics, from all of it, I'd finally be happy. And I was, sort of, but I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't useful. I was just hiding. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Yesterday I stumbled into that shack looking for shelter from a storm. What I found instead was a chance to actually matter again, to do something that makes a difference. Matthew spent 31 years keeping this secret, dying with it, hoping someone would have the guts to do what he couldn't. I can't walk away from that. I won't. Marcus studied him through the screen, then nodded. Okay, then we do this right. We document everything, build an airtight case, and we find someone we can trust to help us bring this forward. Someone with credibility and protection. Who? I'm working on that. In the meantime, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go back to that site. Jake blinked. What? Why? Because photographs aren't enough. We need video documentation. We need you on camera, in that vault, explaining what you found and how you found it. We need your testimony recorded in real time, at the location, before anyone has a chance to deny this exists or claim the evidence was fabricated. You want me to hike back up there? That's a 6-hour round trip minimum, and there's 2 feet of fresh snow. I know, but Jake, think about it. Once we go public, that site is going to be sealed off immediately. Federal agents, military, whoever handles this kind of thing, they'll swoop in and lock it down. This might be your only chance to create a record that can't be disputed or disappeared. Jake ran his hands through his hair. He was exhausted. Every muscle in his body ached. The thought of hiking back up that mountain, breaking into the vault again, was almost overwhelming. But Marcus was right. This was too important to do halfway. "Okay," he said. "Give me a few hours to rest and repack. I'll head back up at first light tomorrow." "Good. I'll have a camera set up ready for you, something professional that timestamps everything. And Jake, take your satellite phone. Stay in contact. I want to know where you are every step of the way." They ended the call. Jake sat in silence, listening to the fire crackle and the wind whisper through the pines outside. He thought about calling Emma, hearing her voice, drawing strength from her optimism and youth. But he couldn't risk telling her anything yet, and lying to her felt worse than not calling at all. Instead, he made himself eat, forced down some dried jerky and crackers even though his stomach was twisted in knots. Then he lay down on his bunk, pulled a thick blanket over himself, and tried to rest. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams of endless tunnels and locked doors, of Matthew's handwriting in the journal, of Emma asking questions he couldn't answer. When he finally gave up and opened his eyes, pale grey light was seeping through the windows. Dawn was still an hour away, but he was done pretending to rest. He got up, rekindled the fire, and started preparing for the hike. Fresh batteries for his flashlight, extra memory cards for the camera Marcus had arranged to have dropped at a cache point near the trailhead, food, water, emergency supplies. Everything went into his pack with methodical precision. By the time the sun crested the eastern peaks, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Jake was on the trail. The temperature had dropped overnight, turning the fresh powder into a firm crust that crunched under his boots. Easier to walk on, at least. Small mercies. The hike up was harder than the hike down had been. His legs were still tired from yesterday, and the elevation gain seemed steeper somehow, like the mountain itself was trying to discourage him. But he pushed forward, pausing occasionally to catch his breath and check his phone for messages from Marcus. 3 hours in, he reached the cache point, a hollowed-out tree stump that hikers sometimes used for leaving supplies or messages. Inside, wrapped in waterproof plastic, was the camera equipment Marcus had promised. A professional-grade video camera with a stabilizing grip, extra batteries, and a note in Marcus's handwriting. "Document everything. Be thorough. Be safe. We're counting on you." Jake pocketed the note and secured the camera to his pack. Then he continued up the trail. What happens next will not only change Jake's life forever, but uncover a conspiracy that powerful people thought was buried for good. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. By early afternoon, Jake stood once again in front of the mining shack. It looked exactly as he'd left it, unremarkable and forgotten, its secrets hidden behind weathered wood and boarded windows. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The fire pit was cold, the ashes from yesterday scattered by drafts. Everything else was exactly as he remembered. He moved quickly now, driven by purpose and the knowledge that daylight was limited. He set up the camera on its stabilizing grip, checked the battery and memory card, then positioned himself in front of it. He pressed record. "My name is Jake Harper. Today is February 20th, 2025. I'm standing in an abandoned mining shack approximately 3.7 miles north of Eagle Ridge Trail in the Colorado Rockies. Yesterday, February 19th, I took shelter here during a severe winter storm. What I'm about to show you was discovered by accident, but what it represents is anything but accidental." He turned the camera toward the sealed door in the back wall. Behind this door is a tunnel that leads to a vault that was created and maintained by the United States government during the Cold War as part of a classified program called District 7. Inside that vault is a cache of bearer bonds with an estimated total value of $295 million. Jake's hands were steady as he worked on the locks again, this time knowing what he was doing It took him less than an hour to break through all three mechanisms. The door swung open, and he carried the camera into the tunnel, narrating every step. As you can see, this is not a natural cave formation. This is engineered infrastructure. Timber supports, electrical conduit, ventilation systems. Someone invested significant resources into creating and maintaining this space. He moved through the tunnel, his voice echoing off the walls, the camera capturing every detail. When he reached the vault door, he paused. This is the primary vault entrance. It's a military-grade security door with a combination lock system. Yesterday, I was able to open it using a sequence found in a journal left by Robert Matthews, the security officer assigned to this site. He worked the combination again, his fingers remembering the sequence. 3, 15, 52, 67, 11, 88. The bolts retracted. The wheel turned. The door opened. Jake stepped inside and swept the camera across the rows of metal containers. These containers hold bearer bonds issued by the United States Treasury between 1976 and 1983. Each bond has a face value of $100,000. Each container holds approximately 50 bonds. He set the camera on a shelf, still recording, then opened one of the containers. The camera caught everything: the protective plastic, the official seals, the elaborate engravings on each certificate. Jake held one up to the camera lens, making sure every detail was visible. These are authentic government-issued bearer bonds. They're negotiable instruments, meaning whoever physically possesses them can redeem them. They're also untraceable, which made them perfect for the kind of emergency scenario District 7 was designed for. He replaced the bond carefully and moved along the shelves, opening more containers, showing the camera the sheer volume of what had been hidden here. His voice remained calm and factual, but inside, the weight of what he was documenting pressed on him like a physical force. According to documents I found at this site, written by Robert Matthews, the security officer responsible for this cache, he was ordered to destroy these bonds in the late 1980s after the Cold War ended. He refused. Instead, he maintained this site for over 30 years, dying in 2010 without ever revealing its location. Jake picked up Matthew's journal and showed it to the camera, flipping through pages, reading key passages aloud. His voice caught when he reached the final entry. "Do what's right, what I couldn't." That's what Matthews wrote. He spent 3 decades protecting this money because he believed it belonged to the American people, not to politicians who wanted to hide their mistakes. He couldn't expose it during his lifetime without destroying himself and his family, so he left it for someone else to find. Someone who could make the choice he couldn't. Jake lowered the journal and looked directly into the camera. "I'm making that choice now. This money needs to be returned to the people it was taken from. Not secretly redistributed by the same officials who tried to bury it, but transparently, publicly, with full accountability for how it was hidden and why." He continued filming for another hour, documenting every container, every label, every piece of evidence. He filmed the climate control systems, the ventilation, the electrical infrastructure. He filmed the tunnel from multiple angles. He filmed himself sealing everything back up, replacing each container exactly as he'd found it. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained, he shut off the camera. The vault fell silent around him. He stood there for a moment, surrounded by $300 million worth of secrets, and felt the full weight of what he'd just done. There was no going back now. The moment this footage reached the outside world, everything would explode. His quiet life in the mountains would be over. His anonymity would be gone. Emma would be pulled into this whether he wanted her to be or not. But it was the right thing to do. He knew it in his bones. Jake secured the camera in his pack, made his way back through the tunnel, and sealed the door behind him. In the main shack, he paused to take one last look around. This place had changed his life. A simple shelter from a storm had become the site of the most important discovery he'd ever make. He stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The temperature was already dropping as the sun moved toward the western peaks. He'd have to hurry to make it off the mountain before dark. The hike down was a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. His mind raced through scenarios, imagining what would happen when Marcus released the footage, when the news broke, when the people who'd buried this secret realized it had been found. He thought about federal agents showing up at his cabin, about lawyers and investigators and endless questions. He thought about Emma's face when she learned what her father had discovered. By the time he reached his cabin, night had fallen completely. The temperature had dropped to near zero, and his breath came in ragged gasps that turned to ice crystals in the air. He stumbled through the door, dropped his pack, and collapsed into a chair. His satellite phone buzzed. Marcus. "Did you get it?" Jake's voice was hoarse. "Yeah, everything, every detail." Good, good. Jake, we need to move fast now. I've been making calls, reaching out to people I trust. There's a journalist I know, someone who specializes in government corruption and classified information. Her name is Sarah Vance. Ever heard of her? Maybe. Should I have? She broke the story about the Pentagon's black budget overruns 3 years ago. Pulitzer finalist. She's tough, she's thorough, and she doesn't back down when powerful people try to shut her up. You think she'll be interested in this? Marcus laughed, a short, sharp sound. Jake, this is the biggest story of her career. Maybe of any journalist's career. She'll be interested. Question is, are you ready to trust her with it? Jake closed his eyes, fatigue pulling at him like gravity. Do I have a choice? Not if you want this done right. We can't just dump this footage online and hope for the best. We need a platform, credibility, protection. Sarah can give us all 3. Okay, set it up. Already did. She wants to meet with you tomorrow, in person. She's driving up from Denver tonight. Tomorrow? Marcus, I can barely move. I need rest. I know. I'm sorry. But Jake, people are already starting to ask questions. I've been careful, but the encrypted file transfer left traces. Someone noticed unusual data moving through secure channels. We're running out of time. Jake's eyes snapped open. What do you mean someone noticed? I mean my firm's IT department flagged the activity. They're not sure what it is yet, but they're asking. And if my firm is asking, other people might be too. We need to control the narrative before someone else does it for us. Fear spiked through Jake's exhaustion. Marcus, if they trace this back to you, I know. That's why we're moving now. Sarah will be at your cabin by noon tomorrow. Show her everything. Let her verify it independently. Then we go public together, all 3 of us, with all the evidence, before anyone can stop us. Jake wanted to argue, to ask for more time, to think through all the implications, but Marcus was right. The clock was ticking. The moment he'd opened that vault door, he'd started a countdown. Now it was a race between truth and cover-up. Okay, he said finally. Noon tomorrow. I'll be ready. Jake, thank you for trusting me with this, for having the guts to do what Matthews couldn't. Don't thank me yet. We don't know how this ends. No, but we know it matters. That's enough. They hung up. Jake sat in the darkness of his cabin, too tired to light a fire, too wired to sleep. He thought about Matthews, alone in his final days, cancer eating him from the inside, carrying a secret that weighed more than any physical burden. He thought about Emma, studying in Arizona, still innocent of what her father had stumbled into. He thought about tomorrow, about Sarah Vance, about the moment when everything he'd found would stop being his secret and become the world's problem. And he thought about the choice he'd made, standing in that vault with a camera in his hands, deciding that some truths were too important to stay buried. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the pines, reminding him that winter in the mountains was unforgiving. You either prepared for what was coming, or it destroyed you. Jake Harper stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the darkness, at the mountains that had been his refuge and his home. Tomorrow, that refuge would be invaded. Tomorrow, his quiet life would end. But tomorrow, the truth would also begin to emerge. And for Robert Matthews, who died alone with his secret, and for all the people who'd been told there wasn't enough money while millions sat hidden in the dark, that made everything worth it. Jake finally lit the fire, made himself eat something, and forced himself to lie down. Sleep came reluctantly, but it came. And when he dreamed, It wasn't of vaults or bonds or government conspiracies. He dreamed of Emma, proud of her father, standing beside him as he did something that actually mattered. The morning arrived cold and brittle, the kind of February dawn that made the mountains feel like they existed at the edge of the world. Jake woke before sunrise, his body still aching from 2 consecutive days of hiking, his mind racing despite the exhaustion. He made coffee, strong enough to strip paint, and stood at his cabin window watching the darkness gradually surrender to grey light. Sarah Vance would be here in 6 hours, a journalist he'd never met, carrying the power to either validate everything he'd found or destroy his credibility before anyone even heard his story. Marcus trusted her. That would have to be enough. He spent the morning preparing, organizing the photographs on his laptop into chronological folders, charging the video camera battery, reviewing every frame of footage to make sure nothing crucial had been missed. The evidence was overwhelming. Anyone looking at this material with even minimal objectivity would see what he'd seen. Proof of a government program that had hidden hundreds of millions of dollars and then tried to erase all evidence of its existence. But Jake had lived long enough to know that evidence and truth weren't always the same thing in the eyes of the powerful. The question wasn't whether he'd found something real. The question was whether the people who'd buried it would allow that reality to come to light. At 11:45, he heard the sound of an engine grinding up the access road to his property. He stepped outside, breath fogging in the cold air, and watched as a dark blue Subaru with Denver plates navigated the final rutted stretch of driveway. The car parked, and a woman climbed out. Sarah Vance was younger than he'd expected, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes that immediately scanned the property with the kind of professional assessment that came from years of walking into uncertain situations. She wore hiking boots, practical jeans, and a heavy coat that suggested she'd done her research about where she was going. Her dark hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and she carried a weathered leather bag over one shoulder. "Jake Harper," she called out, her voice clear and confident. "That's me." She walked toward him, hand extended. Her grip was firm, her eyes never leaving his face as she shook his hand. "Sarah Vance, thanks for agreeing to meet. Marcus speaks highly of you." Marcus is a good lawyer and a better friend. He also doesn't exaggerate, which is why when he called me at midnight and told me he had the biggest story of the decade, I got in my car and drove 4 hours through mountain roads. She paused. "So before we go any further, I need to ask you something directly. Is this real? Everything Marcus told me, everything in those preliminary photos he showed me, is it actually real?" Jake met her eyes. Every word, every image, all of it. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, show me." They spent the next 3 hours inside Jake's cabin. He walked her through everything chronologically: the storm, finding the shack, discovering the sealed door, reading Matthew's journal, opening the vault, the bearer bonds, the return trip to document everything on video. Sarah took notes constantly, asked pointed questions, cross-referenced details, and examined every photograph with the intensity of someone who'd been lied to professionally enough times to develop an immunity to bullshit. When Jake played the video footage on his laptop, showing the vault in full detail, Sarah's professional composure finally cracked. She leaned back in her chair, hand over her mouth, eyes wide. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered. "This is real. This is actually real. I told you it was." "People tell me things are real every day, Jake. 95% of them are either mistaken or lying." She leaned forward again, rewinding the video to watch a specific section. "But this is the 5%. This is what every investigative journalist dreams of finding and most never do. What do we do with it?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, her mind clearly working through strategies and scenarios. "First, we verify everything independently. I need to confirm Robert Matthews' identity, his role in whatever District 7 was, his death in 2010. I need to research the bearer bond program, find corroborating evidence that this kind of emergency cash system actually existed, and I need to talk to experts who can authenticate what we're seeing in these videos. How long will that take? If I work fast, 3 days, maybe 4. I have sources, people who owe me favors, researchers who know how to dig through classified archives. She looked at him seriously. But Jake, once I start making those calls, once I start asking those questions, people are going to notice. The same people who buried this secret in the first place. We need to be prepared for pushback. What kind of pushback? The kind that starts with phone calls suggesting you're mistaken about what you found and escalates to character assassination, legal threats, and possibly worse. These people, whoever they are, they've kept this hidden for decades. They're not going to just let it come to light because we have evidence. Jake stood and walked to the window. Outside, the mountains stretched endlessly, indifferent to human complications. Matthews lived with this secret for 31 years, died with it. I can handle a few phone calls and threats. Can you handle what it'll do to your daughter? Jake turned sharply. What did you say? Sarah's expression was sympathetic but firm. Marcus told me about Emma. 19, University of Arizona, environmental science major. Jake, I'm not trying to scare you, but you need to understand what's coming. The moment this story breaks, every detail of your life becomes public. Your past, your family, your daughter. Reporters will show up at her dorm. People will dig through her social media. If there's anything in either of your backgrounds that can be used to discredit you, it will be. Emma has nothing to do with this. That won't matter. Fair or not, that's how this works. So before we go any further, you need to talk to her. You need to tell her what you found and warn her about what's coming. She deserves that. Jake felt his stomach twist. He'd been avoiding this exact conversation, telling himself he was protecting Emma by keeping her in the dark. But Sarah was right. Emma deserved to know. She deserved to prepare. Okay, he said quietly. I'll call her tonight. Good. In the meantime, I'm going to start verification. I'll check into a hotel in town, begin making calls, reaching out to sources. I'll stay in constant contact with you and Marcus. We move together on this, all three of us. Nobody goes public until we all agree the time is right. Deal? Deal. Sarah began packing up her notes and equipment. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. Jake, can I ask you something? Why are you doing this? You could have walked away, sealed that vault, never told anyone, gone back to your quiet life in the mountains. Why didn't you? Jake thought about Matthew's final journal entry. Do what's right, what I couldn't. Because someone had to, he said simply, and it turned out to be me. Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that softened her professional edge. That's a good answer. I'll be in touch. She left, her Subaru grinding back down the access road, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and the conversation he could no longer avoid. He waited until evening, when he knew Emma would be done with classes, then pulled out his phone and called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and warm. Dad, I was just thinking about you. How's the mountain fortress? Cold, snowy, beautiful as always. He paused, trying to find the right words. I need to talk to you about something. Something important. Her tone shifted immediately. Are you okay? Is something wrong? I'm fine. I'm safe. But something's happened, something I found, and it's going to affect both of us. I need you to listen carefully and I need you to not panic. Can you do that? Dad, you're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry, but I need to tell you this before anyone else does. He took a deep breath. 2 days ago, I took shelter from a storm in an old mining shack. While I was there, I discovered something. A hidden vault containing bearer bonds issued by the government during the Cold War. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth. Silence on the other end. Emma? I'm here. I'm just... Dad, is this a joke? No joke. It's real. All of it. I've documented everything and I'm working with a journalist named Sarah Vance to make this public. Make it public? Why would you... Dad, shouldn't you just call the police or the FBI or something? It's complicated. The people who created this cache tried to destroy it and hide all evidence it ever existed. If I just hand it over to the same government that buried it in the first place, it'll disappear again. But if we go public, if we show the world what was hidden and why, then maybe, just maybe, it can be used the way it should have been all along." Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, uncertain. "What does this mean for us? For you?" "It means my life is about to get complicated. Very complicated. Media attention, investigations, probably threats from people who don't want this story told. And Em, I'm so sorry, but it's going to affect you too. Reporters might show up on campus, people might ask you questions, your social media might get attention you don't want." "Oh my God." I know it's not fair. You didn't ask for any of this, but I couldn't keep you in the dark. You needed to hear it from me first." Another long silence. Jake's heart hammered. Emma was his whole world. The thought that he might be dragging her into something dangerous or damaging made him physically sick. Finally, she spoke. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you believe what you're doing is right? Not legal, not smart, not safe. Right?" Jake closed his eyes. "Yes, I do." "Then I'm with you. Whatever happens, whatever comes, I'm with you. Because you taught me that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. You taught me that some fights are worth having, even when you're scared." Jake's throat tightened. "When did you get so grown up?" "Probably around the time my dad decided to become a mountain man and leave civilization behind. Forced me to mature early." He could hear the smile in her voice. "But seriously, Dad, I'm not a little kid anymore. I can handle some reporters and social media drama. What I can't handle is you carrying this alone because you're trying to protect me. I just don't want you hurt. I know, but I'm stronger than you think. We both are. So you do what you need to do. Expose this thing, make them answer for it, and I'll be right here, cheering you on and probably skipping classes to watch congressional hearings on C-SPAN like a total nerd." Jake laughed, a sound that surprised him with its genuine relief. "I love you, kiddo." "I love you too, Dad. Now go change the world or whatever. I've got a biology exam to study for." They said their goodbyes, and Jake sat in the growing darkness of his cabin, feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier than he had in days. Emma knew. Emma understood. Emma was with him. Now came the hard part. Over the next 3 days, Sarah worked her sources with the precision of a surgeon and the tenacity of a bloodhound. She called Jake twice a day with updates, each conversation revealing another piece of the puzzle that confirmed his discovery wasn't just real, but potentially even bigger than they'd initially thought. "I found Robert Matthews' daughter," Sarah told him on day 2. "Her name is Catherine Matthews Rivera. She's 53, lives in Tucson, Arizona, works as a hospital administrator. I haven't contacted her yet, wanted to clear it with you first." "What would you tell her?" "The truth. That her father left behind evidence of something extraordinary, that he wanted it found, that his last act was an act of conscience." Jake thought about it. "She deserves to know. But Sarah, be gentle. Finding out your dead father was keeping a secret like this, that can't be easy. I'll handle it carefully, I promise." On day 3, Sarah called with a different kind of update, her voice tight with tension. "Jake, we have a problem. A source of mine at the Justice Department says there's been unusual activity in their classified archives division. Someone's been pulling old Cold War files, specifically anything related to emergency contingency programs. Someone knows we're digging. Someone suspects. They don't know what we have yet, but they're aware that questions are being asked. We need to move faster than I planned." "How fast?" "I want to publish in 4 days. That gives me time to finish verification, write the story, and coordinate with my editor. But Jake, once it's out there, there's no taking it back. No second guessing. You need to be absolutely certain this is what you want." Jake looked around his cabin at the simple life he'd built, the peace he'd found in isolation. In 4 days, all of it would change. The privacy, the anonymity, the quiet, gone. But in its place would be something else. Truth, justice, the fulfillment of a dying man's last wish. "I'm certain," he said. "Publish it." "Okay. I need you to do something for me. I need you to go back to the vault one more time. Not to document it, but to verify the current state. I want to be able to say in my article that, as of the day before publication, the cache was still intact and uncompromised. Can you do that? Jake suppressed a groan. Another hike, another trip to the shack. His body still hadn't fully recovered from the last two, but she was right. The verification was important. I'll go tomorrow morning. Thank you. And Jake, be careful. If they suspect what we're doing, they might be watching. The next morning, Jake set out before dawn, moving quickly through the familiar trail. The snow had settled and compacted over the past few days, making the hike easier, though no less exhausting. He reached the shack by mid-morning and immediately knew something was wrong. The door was open, not broken, not forced, just open, hanging slightly ajar like an invitation or a warning. Jake's heart rate spiked. He approached slowly, every sense heightened. He pushed the door wider and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The fire pit cold, the tools undisturbed, the boarded windows intact. Nothing had been moved or taken. But someone had been here. He could feel it, sense it in the same way you sense when you're being watched. He moved to the sealed door at the back. His hands shook slightly as he worked the locks. They opened easier than before, like they'd been recently used. The door swung inward. The tunnel stretched before him, dark and silent. He clicked on his flashlight and moved forward, his boots echoing on the packed floor. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made him flinch. When he reached the vault door, his stomach dropped. It was open. Just a few inches, but definitely open. The combination had been worked. The wheel turned, the massive door pushed inward. Someone had beaten him here. Jake's first instinct was to run. Get out, call Sarah, call Marcus, call someone. But he forced himself to stay calm, to think. If someone had wanted to stop him, they would have done it by now. The fact that the vault was open but nothing else had been disturbed suggested something different. They wanted him to know. They wanted him to see. He pulled the vault door wider and stepped inside, his flashlight sweeping across the shelves. The containers were still there, all of them, lined up in perfect rows. But now there was something new. On the desk where Matthew's journal had sat, there was a manila folder, fresh, new, completely out of place in this decades-old installation. Jake approached it cautiously, as if it might explode. Inside the folder was a single document. A letter typed on official government letterhead, though the specific agency was redacted. It was addressed to whom it may concern, and dated yesterday. Jake read it under his flashlight, his blood running cold with each line. The cache site designated RMS-7 Charlie has been under surveillance since its initial compromise on February 19, 2025. All access has been documented, all evidence collected, all parties identified. The bearer instruments contained within this facility remain property of the United States government under Emergency Powers Act provisions still in effect. Any attempt to remove, photograph, or publicize said instruments constitutes theft of government property and violation of federal secrecy statutes punishable by imprisonment. This serves as official notification that all materials related to this site are classified at the highest levels. Any person possessing such materials is ordered to surrender them immediately to designated federal authorities. Failure to comply will result in prosecution to the fullest extent of applicable law. You have 72 hours. No signature, no name, just authority, absolute and unquestionable. Jake's hands shook as he lowered the letter. They knew. They'd known from the beginning. They'd watched him discover the vault, document everything, contact Marcus, meet with Sarah. They'd let him do it all, gather all the evidence, pull all his allies into the open. And now they were closing the trap. He pulled out his satellite phone with trembling fingers and called Sarah. She answered immediately. Jake, did you verify the site? Sarah, they know. They've known the whole time. There's a letter here, a threat. They're giving us 72 hours to surrender everything or face prosecution. Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steel. Okay. This is what they do. They try to scare you into silence, make you think they have all the power. But Jake, listen to me carefully. Did they remove any of the bonds? Did they take the containers? No, everything's still here. Then they're bluffing. If they had absolute authority over this site, they would have cleaned it out immediately. The fact that they left everything in place means they're not sure about their legal standing. They're hoping fear will do what their lawyers can't. What do? We publish, tomorrow. Screw the 4-day timeline. We go now before they can move against us. I've got enough verification. The story's ready. We just need to pull the trigger. Sarah, they threatened prosecution. Prison. I know, I've been threatened before. So has every journalist who's ever exposed something powerful people wanted hidden. But here's the thing, Jake. Once the story is public, once millions of people know what you found and why it matters, it becomes exponentially harder for them to make you disappear. Public pressure is our best protection. Jake looked around the vault, at the fortune in bearer bonds, at the evidence of government corruption and cover-up. He thought about Matthews, who'd lived in fear for 31 years. He thought about Emma, who'd told him she was with him no matter what. He thought about all the people who'd been told there wasn't enough money while this sat hidden in the dark. Do it, he said. Publish the story. You're sure? I'm sure. But Sarah, we need to do one more thing first. What? We need to contact Matthew's daughter, Catherine. She deserves to know before this goes public. Her father's name is about to be everywhere. She should hear it from us first. Sarah was quiet then. You're right. I'll call her today. Tell her everything. Give her time to prepare. Thank you. Jake, get out of there. Get off that mountain and get somewhere with people around you. Somewhere public. They're less likely to try something if you're visible. Jake didn't need to be told twice. He left the vault, sealed the door behind him, and practically ran through the tunnel and out of the shack. The hike down was a blur of adrenaline and paranoia, every snapping branch making him jump, every shadow suspect. By the time he reached his cabin, the sun was setting. He threw essentials into a bag, grabbed his laptop and all the backup drives, and drove down the mountain road toward town. He checked into a small motel on the main street, paid cash, and barricaded himself in the room. His phone rang. Marcus. Jake, Sarah filled me in. Are you okay? Physically, yeah. Mentally, I'm about 3 steps from completely losing it. That's normal. Listen, I've been consulting with some colleagues who specialize in whistleblower protection. If this goes public the way we're planning, you're going to need legal representation. Good legal representation. I'm putting together a team. Marcus, I can't afford you. You're not paying. This is pro bono. Some fights are too important to worry about billable hours. He paused. Jake, I'm proud of you. Scared for you, but proud. I haven't done anything yet except stumble into something I don't fully understand. You're doing what Matthews couldn't. You're making sure the truth doesn't die with the secret. That's everything. They talked for another hour, coordinating strategy, discussing contingencies. By the time they hung up, Jake felt marginally less terrified and marginally more prepared. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Spoke with Catherine Matthews Rivera. She's devastated and grateful in equal measure. Wants to go on record about her father. This story just got even stronger. Jake replied, When do we publish? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. The article goes live on our website and we simultaneously send copies to every major news outlet. By noon, this will be everywhere. Jake set down his phone and stared at the ceiling of the cheap motel room. In less than 12 hours, his life would change forever. The secret he'd carried for less than a week would become public knowledge. The government that had threatened him would have to answer for what they'd hidden. And somewhere, in whatever place the dead go, Robert Matthews would finally be able to rest. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat up watching the clock, refreshing his email, waiting for Sarah's message that the story had gone live. At 8:59 a.m. Eastern Time, his phone lit up with a notification. The headline appeared on his screen. Mountain shelter reveals government's $295. Million secret. Exclusive investigation uncovers Cold War cash officials tried to erase. Below it, Sarah's byline and a photo of the vault interior taken from his video footage. Jake's hands trembled as he opened the article. Sarah had done exactly what she'd promised. Thorough, factual, devastating. She'd laid out every detail of his discovery, every piece of evidence, every attempt at cover-up. She'd interviewed Catherine Matthews Rivera, who spoke about her father's integrity and the burden he'd carried. She'd included expert analysis of the bearer bonds, legal opinions on the government's authority to hide them, and historical context about District 7. It was journalism at its finest, unbiased, unimpeachable, undeniable. Within an hour, the story had been picked up by every major news network. By noon, it was trending on every social media platform. By evening, congressional leaders were calling for investigations. Jake's phone exploded with messages, reporters requesting interviews, lawyers offering representation, friends he hadn't spoken to in years reaching out with shock and congratulations. And through it all, a steady stream of messages from regular people thanking him for exposing the truth. But there were other messages too. Anonymous threats, accusations that he was a thief, a traitor, a fraud. People who insisted the government had every right to hide money if national security demanded it. The vitriol was shocking in its intensity. Through it all, Jake stayed in his motel room, doing interviews via video chat, coordinating with Sarah and Marcus, and trying to process the fact that his life as he'd known it was over. On the third day after publication, the government finally responded. The Attorney General held a press conference announcing a full investigation into the District 7 program and promising accountability for any officials who'd participated in the cover-up. They stopped short of validating Jake's discovery, but didn't deny it either. It was, Sarah explained, as close to an admission as they were likely to get. The 72-hour deadline passed without any arrests. The threats had been empty after all, or at least unenforceable once public opinion had mobilized behind Jake's discovery. A week after publication, Jake finally allowed himself to return to his cabin. The access road was lined with news vans and reporters, but Sarah had arranged for local police to keep them at a distance. He walked through his door to find everything exactly as he'd left it. The mountains were still there, the silence still wrapped around him. But he was different now. He'd crossed a line from observer to participant, from isolation to involvement. His phone rang. Emma. Dad, have you seen the polls? 87% of Americans support a full investigation. They're talking about using the money for education funding and infrastructure. You did this. You actually changed something. Jake smiled, exhausted but genuine. We did this. You, me, Marcus, Sarah, Matthews, all of us. Dad? Yeah? I'm proud of you. Those 4 words, simple and sincere, meant more than any headline or congressional hearing ever could. Jake Harper had walked into a storm seeking shelter and found a secret that would change everything. Now, standing in his cabin with his daughter's pride warming him more than any fire ever could, he understood something fundamental. The mountains would always be here. The silence would always call to him. But some things mattered more than peace. Some truths demanded to be told, no matter the cost. And sometimes the right choice was the hard one. The congressional hearings began 6 weeks after Sarah's article broke. Jake sat in a wood-paneled room that smelled of old furniture polish and nervous sweat, facing a semicircle of senators and representatives who looked at him with expressions ranging from genuine curiosity to thinly veiled hostility. The gallery behind him was packed with journalists, whistleblower advocates, and citizens who'd driven hours just to witness history. Committee Chairman Senator Patricia Whitmore, a silver-haired woman from Massachusetts with a reputation for extracting truth like a dentist pulling teeth, leaned forward into her microphone. Mr. Harper, let's be clear about what we're discussing today. You've presented evidence of a government program that, if your claims are accurate, hidden $295 million in untraceable bearer bonds for over 4 decades. That's a serious allegation. Jake's voice was steady, despite the cameras and the weight of the moment. Senator, with respect, I haven't alleged anything. I've presented documented evidence, photographs, video footage, the journal of the security officer assigned to maintain the site. The evidence speaks for itself. A Republican senator from Texas, Mason Drake, jumped in. "Mr. Harper, isn't it true that you illegally broke into a secured government facility, that you tampered with classified materials without authorization?" Jake had been prepared for this. Marcus and the legal team had drilled him for days. "Senator, I took shelter during a life-threatening storm in what appeared to be an abandoned structure. Once inside, I discovered evidence of what I reasonably believed to be either a crime or a cover-up. As a citizen, I had a duty to document and report what I found." "A duty?" Drake's voice dripped with skepticism. "Or an opportunity? How much have you personally profited from this media circus you've created?" "I haven't profited at all. I've refused every interview payment, every book deal, every speaking engagement that's been offered. This isn't about money, Senator. It's about accountability." Senator Whitmore cut in before Drake could continue. "Let's move on. Mr. Harper, can you walk us through exactly what you found in that vault? In your own words, for the record." Jake spent the next 40 minutes detailing everything: the storm, the shack, Matthew's journal, the bearer bonds, the climate control systems that proved active maintenance. He described his decision to document everything: his consultations with Marcus and Sarah, and his determination to ensure the truth came out before it could be buried again. When he finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Senator Linda Yamamoto from California spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Harper, we've had testimony from Treasury Department officials who claim they have no records of any District 7 program, no authorization for the bonds you described. They're suggesting, essentially, that what you found might be counterfeit or part of some private operation rather than a government program." Jake reached into his folder and pulled out a document Sarah had uncovered during her research. "Senator, with respect to the Treasury officials, I'd like to submit this for the record. It's a declassified memo from 1991, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. It references the decommissioning of emergency contingency financial assets created during the Cold War period. It specifically mentions District 7 by name and orders the destruction of all related materials." The room erupted in murmurs. Senator Whitmore took the document, examined it, and passed it to her colleagues. Her expression shifted from neutral to genuinely surprised. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "A journalist named Sarah Vance obtained it through legal channels after months of searching. It was buried in archives that most people didn't know existed. But it's authentic, Senator. The government created these caches. They ordered them destroyed, and at least one security officer, Robert Matthews, refused to comply." Senator Whitmore nodded slowly. "We'll need to hear from Miss Vance and from Treasury officials again in light of this new evidence." She looked directly at Jake. "Mr. Harper, regardless of how this investigation concludes, I want to acknowledge something. You could have walked away. You could have kept this secret. You didn't. That took courage." Jake felt his throat tighten. "Thank you, Senator. But the courage belongs to Robert Matthews. I just finished what he started." The hearing continued for another 3 hours. By the end, even the hostile senators had softened their tone. The evidence was too overwhelming, too well documented to dismiss. Something had been hidden. Something needed to be explained. As Jake left the hearing room, flanked by Marcus and surrounded by reporters, he spotted someone standing at the edge of the crowd. A woman in her early 50s, with grey-streaked hair and Robert Matthews' eyes. Catherine Matthews Rivera. They'd spoken on the phone several times since Sarah had first contacted her, but this was their first face-to-face meeting. She pushed through the crowd, and when she reached Jake, tears were streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving my father's life meaning, for making sure his sacrifice wasn't for nothing." Jake embraced her, not caring about the cameras capturing the moment. He was a good man, a brave man. The world deserves to know that. Catherine pulled back, wiping her eyes. "There's something I need to tell you, something I found after Sarah contacted me. I'd been going through my father's things, boxes I hadn't opened since he died. I found another journal, one he kept at home, separate from the one at the site." Jake's pulse quickened. "What did it say?" "He wrote about why he couldn't destroy the bonds. It wasn't just about the money. He'd discovered that the program had been funded by diverting money that was supposed to go to veterans' benefits and education programs. The government had literally stolen from its own citizens to create these secret caches, then tried to erase all evidence when the Cold War ended. My father saw that as the ultimate betrayal. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. "Did you tell the committee?" "I'm testifying next week. I wanted you to know first." She squeezed his hand. "My father would have liked you. You're exactly the kind of person he hoped would find his secret." Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded beyond anything Jake had imagined. Treasury officials were subpoenaed, former intelligence officers testified, documents were declassified. And slowly, piece by piece, the full truth emerged. District 7 had been real. Multiple cache sites had existed across the country. Most had been destroyed as ordered in the 1990s, but at least 3 others had simply disappeared from records, their locations known only to security officers who died without revealing them. Robert Matthews' site was the first to be rediscovered, but investigators were now searching for the others. The bearer bonds Jake had found were authenticated as genuine. The total value, adjusted for decades of theoretical interest, was closer to $400 million than the original $295 million, and Catherine had been right about the funding source. Congressional investigators traced the money back to budget diversions in the late 1970s and early 80s. Money earmarked for the VA, for public schools, for infrastructure, had been secretly siphoned into District 7. Millions of Americans had been told there wasn't enough funding for essential services, while hundreds of millions sat in hidden vaults. The public outcry was unprecedented. 3 months after Jake's testimony, Congress passed the Matthews Accountability and Restitution Act. The bill was named in honor of Robert Matthews and mandated that all recovered District 7 funds be liquidated and distributed according to a specific formula. 70% would go toward reducing the national debt, 20% would fund educational programs in underfunded school districts, and 10% would be paid to the families of the security officers who'd maintained the sites, including Catherine Matthews Rivera. The bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. For once, Republicans and Democrats agreed. What had been hidden needed to be made right. Jake watched the signing ceremony from his cabin, Emma beside him on the couch. She'd flown in from Arizona for spring break and hadn't left his side since arriving. They sat in comfortable silence as the president signed the bill, surrounded by congressional leaders and invited guests that included Catherine and Sarah. "You should be there," Emma said softly. "This is your victory." Jake shook his head. "It's not about me. It never was. I just opened a door that needed opening." "Dad, you're impossible, you know that?" He smiled. "I learned from the best." The months that followed brought changes Jake had never anticipated. The cabin that had been his refuge became a destination. People hiked up the mountain road just to thank him, to shake his hand, to tell him their own stories of government betrayal and the hope his discovery had given them. At first, Jake resented the intrusion. His privacy was gone. His quiet life had been replaced by constant attention. But gradually, he began to see it differently. These people weren't invading his space. They were seeking connection, validation, proof that one person could still make a difference. So he started inviting them in. He made coffee. He listened to their stories. He reminded them that he'd just been a man seeking shelter from a storm who'd stumbled onto something bigger than himself. Sarah visited regularly, working on a book about the entire District 7 scandal. She'd won numerous journalism awards for her initial reporting, but she insisted the story wasn't finished until every cache was found and every dollar accounted for. Marcus came up twice a month, ostensibly to discuss legal matters, but really just to check on his friend. He'd left his corporate firm to start a non-profit focused on whistleblower protection, inspired by Jake's experience. And Emma, brilliant and fierce Emma, changed her major to public policy. She wanted to understand how systems could be reformed, how corruption could be prevented, how future Robert Matthews wouldn't have to die with their secrets. One afternoon in late summer, Nearly 8 months after Jake had first stumbled into that mining shack, he hiked back up to the site one final time. The government had officially sealed the vault after removing all the bearer bonds, but they'd preserved the structure as a historical landmark. There was talk of creating a museum, a place where people could learn about District 7 and the importance of transparency in government. Jake stood in the main room of the shack, now clean and restored, looking at the sealed door that had started everything. A plaque had been mounted beside it. This site stands as a reminder that secrets kept in the name of security can become betrayals kept in the name of power. Robert Matthews, security officer, maintained this facility for 31 years with the hope that truth would eventually prevail. His courage, and the courage of those who brought his secret to light, remind us that democracy requires not just laws, but individuals willing to uphold them. Jake traced his fingers over the words, thinking about Matthews, about the weight the man had carried, about his final plea. Do what's right. What I couldn't. I did it, Jake whispered to the empty room. I hope it was enough. Behind him, a voice spoke. It was more than enough. Jake turned to find an older man standing in the doorway, late 70s, leaning on a cane. He wore a veteran's cap and a familiar expression. The weight of secrets kept too long. Can I help you? Jake asked. The man hobbled inside, looking around the shack with eyes that held recognition. My name is Thomas Brennan. I was a security officer for District 7. I maintained a site in Montana for 23 years before I destroyed it as ordered. His voice cracked. I followed my orders. I did what Robert Matthews couldn't. Jake's heart hammered. Why are you telling me this? Because I've lived with that choice every day since 1994. I destroyed evidence of government corruption because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I chose self-preservation over truth. Tears filled the old man's eyes. Watching you, watching what you did with the courage Matthews knew you'd have, it's destroyed me. I should have been braver. I should have kept the evidence. I should have been the one to expose this. Jake stepped forward and placed a hand on Brennan's shoulder. You're not responsible for my choices or Matthew's choices. You made the decision you could live with at the time. But it was the wrong decision. And now I have to live with that until I die. Then live with it by helping make sure it doesn't happen again. Testify, tell your story, help Sarah with her book, show people what it costs to choose silence over truth. Your story matters too, Mr. Brennan. Not just Matthews, not just mine, all of us. The old man looked at Jake with something like hope. You think anyone would care what an old coward has to say? I think people need to hear from someone who made a different choice, who understands the weight of both paths. That's not cowardice. That's wisdom earned the hard way. Brennan nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. They stood together in that shack, two men connected by a secret that had shaped both their lives in different ways. Before he left, Brennan shook Jake's hand with surprising strength. Thank you, he said, for finishing what we started, for proving it was possible. After he left, Jake sat on the front steps of the shack as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. He thought about the journey that had started here, about the storm that had driven him to shelter, about the choice that had changed everything. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Dad just got accepted into a graduate program studying government transparency and accountability. Guess who inspired me? Jake smiled, typing back, someone much smarter than her old man. Emma's reply came quickly. Don't sell yourself short. You're kind of a big deal now. My roommate wants your autograph. I told her you'd probably just sign it some guy who got lucky in a storm. That's accurate. That's humble. There's a difference. Love you. Proud of you. Now stop hiding in the mountains and come visit. I want to show off my famous dad. Jake laughed, pocketing his phone. Famous. The word felt ridiculous. He was still the same person who'd walked away from civilization 15 years ago, still the same guy who preferred mountains to people and silence to conversation. But Emma was right about one thing. He wasn't hiding anymore. As the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jake stood and began the hike back to his cabin. The trail was familiar now, worn smooth by his boots and the boots of countless visitors who'd made the pilgrimage to see where it all began. He thought about Matthews, who'd died alone with his burden. He thought about Brennan, who'd live with his choice until his final breath. He thought about all the people who'd been affected by District 7, by the money stolen and hidden, by the lies told in the name of security. And he thought about the future, about Emma's generation, about whether they'd have the courage to demand better from their leaders and from themselves. When he reached his cabin, the last light was fading from the sky. He built a fire, made dinner, and sat at his window looking out at the mountains that had been his sanctuary and his prison, his hiding place and his launching point. Tomorrow, he'd call Sarah about a speaking engagement she'd been pestering him to accept. He'd say yes this time. Someone needed to tell this story, to keep it alive, to remind people that secrets kept by governments are promises broken to citizens. Tomorrow, he'd start planning a trip to Arizona to visit Emma, to see her campus, to meet her friends, to be present in her life instead of just a voice on the phone. Tomorrow, he'd keep being the person Matthews had hoped would find his secret. Someone willing to do what was right even when it was hard, even when it was frightening, even when the easier path was right there, tempting and safe. But tonight, he was just Jake Harper, a man who'd found shelter in a storm and discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't the ones we seek, but the ones that find us. Anyone can stumble upon something valuable, but it takes real courage to ensure it's used for good. Sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what you find, it's what you choose to do with it. As winter prepared to return to the Colorado mountains, Jake Harper stood at the window of his cabin one final morning, coffee warming his hands, watching the first snow of the season dust the peaks with white. He wasn't seeking shelter anymore, wasn't running from complicated choices or uncomfortable truths. He had become the man who reminded the world that integrity still matters, that truth still wins, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay silent when staying silent would be easier. The wilderness guide who once fled civilization to avoid responsibility had become the citizen who proved one person could still change everything. Because for Jake, and for everyone his story would continue to inspire, the real fortune was never in the vault. It was in the choice, the end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories are waiting for you. Click to continue the journey with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe doing the right thing still matters.